Greetings, class, and welcome to week 14. This will be our last lecture of the semester, which is sad, but I guess it has to end at some point, okay? We'll still review, and we still have an exam to take and papers to grade and things like that, but this will be your last lecture, so let's make it count, okay? So this week we are going to devote entirely to Citizen Kane from 1941. So it's directed by and starring Orson Welles, who was 25 at the time. And it's based somewhat on the life of publisher slash tycoon William Randolph Hearst. Hearst Castle, which I'm sure you've heard of down in San Simeon, is kind of a stand-in for Xanadu, or rather Xanadu is a stand-in for that. William Randolph Hearst was pissed off enough that he did sue over this film because he felt it paralleled his life a little too much and made him out to be a bit of an a-hole, which he definitely was. So for a film of the early 1940s, Citizen Kane was stylistically and technically advanced. The photography, editing, acting, etc. would influence filmmakers for the next 60 years. So this does not look like a movie from 1941. It's in black and white, okay, but everything else about it is way ahead of its time, and that's part of what we want to talk about. So is this the greatest film ever made? I'd say no, but people have been saying it is for years and years. So it is or it isn't, depends on your opinion and critics' opinions. But every aspect of its production functions at a very high level. So it makes it an ideal film class film to study. So the photography was photographed by Greg Toland. The film's main contributions are deep focus photography, which means you're photographing a scene in depth where everything is in focus. Okay, you accentuate that three-dimensional space. It's ironically something that most filmmakers try not to do. And also low-key lighting, so allowing parts of the frame to go dark, often for the sake of commentary and dramatic expression. That's something that is often used in film noir films, so there's definitely some noirish aspects to this particular film. Also, crane shots and special effects shots are also used effectively throughout. They may look kind of oldie-timey, but they get the job done. So the mise-en-scène. So due to Welles' experience as a stage director, most of the film is made up of wide and medium shots and lengthy takes with complicated camera movements that really allow the actors to kind of go through their lines and their actions, and the duration becomes important. And we've seen films with long take style. We can see the effect of that. The shots are very carefully composed for both commentary and dynamic movement. So you have that combination of long takes and also deep focus. So it creates a very interesting mise-en-scène. So editing. So although the story is fragmented, and it is very, very fragmented, the editing still manages to convey a coherent narrative. So it mixing the present with the past. We've got a bunch of flashbacks. Different editing styles are used throughout. So you've got sequence shot style with the very long takes, thematic montage, very quick cutting, and then also classical cutting as well. So this film goes through kind of individual narratives throughout, and the editing reflects that. With regards to sound, coming from a background of radio drama, which was how Orson Welles financed his plays, and that's actually how he initially became famous. If you've ever heard of the War of the Worlds debacle, he did a radio play, and it actually fooled people in New Jersey into thinking that aliens were landing. So Welles was quite knowledgeable about sound recording and editing techniques. So sounds are manipulated to match the visuals, so flat and dry, or muffled, or echoey and distorted. A lot of playing around with the audio in this film. The sounds are also overlapped to create sound montage, where one sound goes into another, creates new meaning, very much the way regular montage works. And sound is also used to connect sequences ranging over long time spans and disparate subject matter. So pay very close attention to the way they use sound to kind of segue from one time period to another. Acting. Welles had a stable of actors from his theater days, and he was an actor himself, of course. He called his group the Mercury Players. They were all unknown and inexperienced in film, but they knew each other and worked well together from doing plays together. Wells' experience as a Shakespearean actor prepared him for the demands of playing Charles Foster Kane from the ages of 22 to 72. And 1940s old age makeup is worse than today's. Today's old age makeup, I think, is still crap, but 1940s old age makeup is really bad. So he had to do a lot of acting in order to make it seem like he was older because the makeup wasn't doing him any help. Wells' theatrical background contributed to the lengthy takes and deep compositions, which we already mentioned, which allowed performances to play out and gain intensity over the course of the scene. So pay attention to that as well, the way that these performances are given time to really become something. So the story structure, the story has a flashback structure, starting and ending at roughly the same place. The story has a circular structure to parallel the audience's fruitless chasing after Rosebud. You've probably heard of Rosebud. That's what they're trying to find out the meaning of in this film. The plot consists of the individual narratives told by Kane's friends, family, and associates, give the otherwise confusing story a coherent structure. So all that weaving in and out of the past and the present is given coherence by those individual narratives. With regards to writing, the authorship of the script has been questioned since it was written. So how much of it is Herman Mankiewicz and how much is Orson Welles? They received equal billing, but the two argued over whose original idea it was, who did more writing. We may never know the answer to that question. At any rate, the script is full of intelligent and realistic dialogue, symbolism and metaphor, and the perspective and personality of each narrator, which is something that is particularly hard to do when you are a writer. So the script has been likened to a prism because of the way that each narrator, each character kind of affects and changes the narrative. So ideologically, Wells was a leftist in his political leanings. And when I say leftist, I'm talking about I think he was a communist, actually. He may have had a National Communist Party card, to be honest. So the politics of Citizen Kane are fairly liberal, but the character of Kane undergoes a transformation from liberal to authoritarian. So he becomes virtually fascistic as he gets older, as does his attitude towards his reading public. So as Kane says, I might have been a really great man if I hadn't grown up rich, which definitely suggests that Orson Welles didn't have the greatest attitude towards wealthy people. So critique of this film. This received rave critical reviews, but was a commercial flop. The same thing happened to Welles' next film, The Magnificent Ambersons from 1942, except that the studio butchered that film in the editing room in attempts to make it a commercially viable film, and then they burned the additional footage. So whereas there is an original version of Citizen Kane, you could say a director's cut, there is not the same thing of The Magnificent Ambersons, which some people say that would be the greatest film if there was a complete version of it. So the Cahiers du Cinema clique, who we talked about last week, Truffaut, Godard, and Bazin, they all idolized Welles. So even though Orson Welles did not make very many films, to the auteur theorists, he was definitely at the top of the list. They kind of saw him as like a victim of the Hollywood system. So we're not going to do regular questions this week. Instead, what we're going to do is I'm going to have you folks write down your impressions of what you thought of as you watch the film. So photography and mise-en-scène, I find that these two things are very closely linked, so I want you to pay attention to that. Just what are some shots that you notice? What are some shots that really just jump out at you, or things you notice within them? Same thing with editing. Do you notice any interesting editing techniques? Sound, there's lots of sound to listen to as opposed to look at. Acting, story, writing, ideology, and then critique. What are some just impressions you have on that? So try to hit all 8 of these. Write at least something down when I put the discussion up, and that'll be grounds for further discussion. So you've been an absolutely wonderful class. I'm going to miss you folks. I'm sorry that our semester went kind of sideways on us, but we did the best we possibly could. I'll be probably giving you some more documents and recording another video for the review, and then I'll get the exam up, and we will wrap up the semester. So, been a pleasure.